I had invited my family to a lavish Christmas dinner. On the day itself, they ditched me, eating elsewhere together. I dined alone, weeping, until my grandson walked into the restaurant and handed me an envelope. When I opened it, that key and the DNA test changed everything. Nice to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I spent 3 days preparing for what was meant to be our first proper Christmas dinner in years. The reservation at the Gilded Stag wasn't cheap, $1,500 for our table. But I didn't care. At 68, I had learned that time with family was worth any price. Or so I believed. The irony wasn't lost on me, that I was trying so hard to bring together people who barely tolerated my presence the rest of the year. But Wade had been gone for 6 months now, and the holidays felt unbearably heavy without him. I needed my family around me. I needed to feel like I still mattered to someone. I chose my outfit carefully that morning. The midnight blue dress Wade always said brought out my eyes. The pearl necklace he'd given me for our 40th anniversary. My hands trembled slightly as I fastened the clasp. I told myself it was excitement, not dread. But deep down, I knew better. The call started around 3 p.m., just as I was getting ready to leave for the restaurant. "Mom, I'm so sorry." Bianca's voice was syrupy sweet on the phone. "Phoenix got something, and we can't risk infecting everyone. You understand, right?" My daughter had perfected that tone over the years, the one that sounded caring but felt dismissive. Phoenix was my granddaughter. Bianca's youngest, and supposedly my pride and joy, though I hadn't seen her in months. "Of course, darling," I heard myself say. "Is there anything I can do to help?" No, we're fine. Let's just reschedule." Reschedule. As if family dinners were tennis matches you could move at will. 20 minutes later, my son Dean called. "Mom, listen, I'm stuck at the office. This deal is going south, and I have to stay and fix it. You know how it is." I knew how it was. Dean's deals were always more important than his mother. It had been that way for 30 years. "What about Evangeline and the kids?" I asked, referring to his wife and my other grandchildren. "They're helping Bianca with Phoenix right now, you know. Trying to keep the kids occupied while she's sick." Something cold settled in my stomach. They were all together. A reschedule? Well, only for a few hours. Nothing planned or anything. Nothing planned. Right. The last call came from my youngest, Colby. His excuse was the most creative yet. His car had broken down, and AAA couldn't reach him for hours. He was stranded. "I'm so sorry. Maybe next time." I sat in my living room, still in my midnight blue dress, staring at my phone. 3 children, 3 excuses, all delivered within an hour of each other. The coordination was almost impressive in its cruelty. But I had already paid the reservation. The dress was already on, and sitting alone in my apartment felt worse than sitting alone in public. So, I drove to the restaurant anyway. The Gilded Stag was everything I had hoped for. Elegant, warm, filled with families celebrating together. The hostess looked at me with thinly veiled pity when I explained I would be alone at the table set for 6. "Would you prefer a smaller table?" she asked gently. "No," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "Leave it as it is." I ordered wine first, a bottle of the Bordeaux Wade had loved so much. The waiter didn't comment on my obvious solo drinking, for which I was grateful. I ordered appetizers I couldn't afford, main courses, trying to fill the huge table with food since I couldn't fill it with people. The turning point came when I saw a family at the next table. 3 generations laughing together, sharing stories. The grandmother, obviously cherished, at the center. The tears started then, soft at first, then unstoppable. I was just dabbing my eyes with the cloth napkin when I heard running footsteps. Reed burst through the restaurant doors. His 17-year-old face was flushed from the cold and something else. Anger, perhaps, or determination. "Grandma Diana." His voice echoed through the restaurant, and several diners looked up. He wove through the tables, ignoring the maitre d's protests, until he reached me. His dark hair was disheveled, his coat half-buttoned as if he'd dressed in a hurry. "Reed," I stood up, confused. What are you doing here? Aren't you with your mother and the others? He was breathing heavily, as if he'd run block after block. In his hand was a yellow envelope, thick and official-looking. His eyes were shining with tears he was trying to hold back. I had to find you, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I couldn't let them do this to you. Do what, darling? What are you talking about? He glanced around the restaurant, then back at the envelope in his hands. They're all together, Grandma. At Valentino's Trattoria. 3 blocks from here. They've been planning this for weeks. My knees went weak.
I sank back into my chair.
Planned what? Reed's jaw tightened in a way that painfully reminded me of Wade when he was angry. The dinner wasn't the real plan. They needed you out of the way tonight because, he held up the envelope, of this. I stared at the envelope as if it might bite me. What is it? It's from Grandpa Wade's lawyer. It arrived at Mom's house today. His voice dropped to a whisper. It's his will, Grandma. And there's something else. He sat heavily in the chair next to mine, the one that should have belonged to his mother. They forced me to come with them to Valentino's, saying it was a family meeting to discuss Grandpa's future. But when the lawyer started reading, Reed's hands were shaking now as he placed the envelope on the table between us.
Everything is yours, Grandma. The lake house, the investments, everything. Grandpa left it all to you.
The restaurant seemed to fade around us.
That's wonderful, sweetheart.
But why would that upset everyone? I mean, I'm his widow. Because they told everyone, including me, that Grandpa would be leaving most of it to them. Mom was planning to renovate the lake house. Uncle Dean wanted to use the investments for his business. Uncle Colby wanted to sell part of it to pay off his debts. My mouth went dry. How long have they known about the will? Months, Reed said quietly. Maybe longer. But there's more, Grandma. There's something else inside that they didn't want you to see. He reached into the envelope and pulled out what looked like lab results. It's a DNA test, Grandma. Grandpa had it done before he died. I took the papers with trembling hands, squinting to decipher the scientific language I couldn't quite understand. But some things were clear enough. The test compared Reed's DNA to that of my family. I don't understand, I whispered. Reed's voice was barely audible now. I'm not really your grandson, Grandma Diana. I'm not Mom's biological son. She adopted me when I was 2, but she never told you the truth. She used me all these years to get money from you and Grandpa, pretending I was bloodkin. The papers fluttered from my hands onto the floor. The wine glass tipped over. Red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like blood. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my life, crumbled around me. But as I looked at Reed, this boy who had run through the streets to find me, who had chosen the truth over the lies that had sustained him for 15 years, I realized something else was beginning. Something that might, for the first time in years, be real. Reed helped me to the restroom, where I splashed cold water on my face, trying to process what he had just told me. My reflection looked older than my 68 years. The carefully applied makeup was now smeared with tears. But my eyes looked different somehow. Alert, perhaps, for the first time in years. When we returned to the table, I had Reed eat something while he recounted the whole story. His voice was calm now, as if he'd carried this secret for so long that it was a relief to finally share it. The lawyer's office was nothing like I expected, he began, picking at the breadbasket. Mr. Thompson had this huge mahogany desk, and law books everywhere. Mom, Uncle Dean, and Uncle Colby were sitting there, looking so confident, like they already knew what they were inheriting. I poured myself another glass of wine. My hands were steadier now. How long have you known about the will reading? Mom got the call 3 weeks ago. She made a whole production out of how sad it was that we had to handle Grandpa's affairs. But I could tell she was excited. She kept talking about what we could do with the lake house, how it needed to be modernized, how we could make it into something really special. The lake house. Wade and I had bought it 30 years ago as our retirement dream. We'd spent every summer there, reading on the porch, swimming in the lake, planning our golden years together. The thought of Bianca gutting it and turning it into some kind of trophy home made my stomach turn. What happened at the lawyer's office then? Reed took a sip of water before continuing. Mr. Thompson started reading the will, and at first, everything seemed normal. Small bequests to charities, some personal items for the kids. But then he got to the big stuff. The house, the investments, the savings. Everything, without exception, was left to you. I could picture the scene. My 3 children sitting there, their confident smiles slowly fading as they realized their inheritance wasn't coming. Mom's face went completely white, Reed continued. Uncle Dean started arguing with the lawyer, saying there must be a mistake, that Grandpa had promised them things. Uncle Colby just sat there with his mouth open. What did the lawyer say? He was very professional but firm. He said the will was very clear and had only been updated 6 months before Grandpa's death. Everything goes to you, with one exception. If anything happens to you, then everything goes to the grandchildren in equal shares. The middle generation was completely bypassed. That sounded like Wade. He had always protected me, sometimes more than I realized. Even in death, he looked out for my interests. But then, Reed said, Mr. Thompson pulled out another envelope. His voice dropped. He said Grandpa had left specific instructions on when it should be opened. It was only to be opened if there were disputes over the will or if someone questioned the legitimacy of family relationships. My heart began to pound again. The DNA test. Right. Mr. Thompson said Grandpa had been concerned about some things he'd overheard at family gatherings. People talking about money, making plans. He wanted to make sure he knew exactly who was truly family, and who wasn't. I thought of our last family dinners before Wade died. He'd been quieter than usual, observing everyone more closely. I'd assumed it was just the cancer making him tired, but perhaps he'd seen things I was too trusting to notice. So the lawyer opened the envelope right there? Reed nodded. The DNA results showed that I'm not biologically related to anyone in that room. Not Mom, not the uncles, not you. And there was a letter from a private investigator Grandpa had hired. A private investigator? Yes, apparently Mom had lied about my adoption for 15 years. The story she told everyone, that I was the son of a distant cousin who died in a car accident? That was all made up. She got me through an informal adoption from a teenage mother who couldn't keep me. There's no blood relation to your family at all.
I sank back in my chair as if struck.
But why would she lie about that? Reed's laugh was bitter, far too old for his 17 years.
Money, Grandma.
It was always about money. Mom found out early on that you and Grandpa were susceptible to sad stories, especially ones involving kids. So she concocted the perfect sad story, the orphaned grandnephew who needed a loving home. The pieces began to fit together. All the times Bianca had called, asking for help with Reed's expenses, his school clothes, sports equipment, summer camps, tutoring. I'd written check after check, glad to give my grandson opportunities. How much do you think they took from us over the years? I asked. The investigator's report had numbers. For my expenses alone, school, clothes, activities, doctor's bills, probably close to $250,000 in 15 years. But that doesn't count all the other things.
What other things?
Reed hesitated, as if afraid to hurt me further. The times Mom said you were having memory problems and needed help managing your finances. The loans Uncle Dean needed for his business ventures, Uncle Colby's gambling debts that were supposedly family emergencies. Each revelation was like another weight settling on my chest. They've been planning this for years, decades, Grandma. Mom used to coach me on what to say when we visited you and Grandpa, how to act grateful, how to mention things I needed, how to make you feel important and generous. I thought that was just normal family stuff until tonight. I looked at this boy, this young man who wasn't my grandson, but had risked everything to tell me the truth. What happened after the lawyer finished reading? They freaked out. Mom started screaming that it must be a mistake, that Grandpa was senile when he wrote the will. Uncle Dean was on the phone with his lawyer before we even left the office. Uncle Colby just kept saying, "This isn't fair." And you? Reed met my gaze directly. I sat there, thinking about all the times you hugged me and told me you loved me. All the birthday cards with money in them, the Christmas gifts you really couldn't afford, the way you always asked about my grades and my friends, like you actually cared. And I realized that even if we aren't blood, you were more of a real grandmother to me than anyone else in this family was real family. My throat tightened. Reed, they didn't even notice I was gone. They were too busy planning how to contest the will, how to prove Grandpa was incompetent, how to get what they thought they deserved. Mom was already talking about hiring her own lawyer. So you came here? I took the subway and ran the last 8 blocks. I couldn't let them do this to you. Grandma, you've been alone enough already. As I looked across the table at Reed, his earnest face still flushed from running through the cold night to find me, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not just love, but hope. Perhaps real family wasn't about blood after all. Perhaps it was about showing up when it mattered. But as I reached across to squeeze his hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight's revelations were only the beginning. If my children had lied about Reed for 15 years, what else were they hiding? And more importantly, what else were they willing to do to get their hands on Wade's money? The taxi ride to my apartment was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Reed sat clutching the yellow envelope, as if it contained explosives, which in a way, I supposed it did. Every few blocks, he'd cast a worried glance my way, as if afraid I might suddenly decide he was the enemy too. You can stay the night, I told him as we pulled up to my building. We'll sort out the rest tomorrow. He nodded gratefully. Mom's probably wondering where I am already. Let her wonder. In my small apartment, I brewed tea while Reed sat at my kitchen table, finally able to relax. He looked so young in the soft light, too young to carry the weight of the secrets he'd been holding. How long have you known? I asked, setting a mug in front of him. I mean, that you weren't related to us. Reed cupped the warm mug in his hands, staring into the steam. I've suspected for years, but I only found out for sure tonight. There were always little things that didn't add up, mostly medical stuff. When I was 12, I needed an appendectomy. The doctors kept asking about family medical history, and Mom would get this panicked look every time.
Chat make-up difference Doris.
Sometimes she'd say my birth parents died too young to know their medical history. Other times, she'd claim I inherited certain traits from your side of the family, but her stories never matched up. I thought of all the times I'd looked at Reed and wondered how different he was from the rest of us. His dark hair where we were all fair, his height where we were average, his artistic talents where no one else in the family could draw a straight line. And then there was the way she'd talk about my adoption when she thought I couldn't hear her, Reed continued. She'd be on the phone with Uncle Dean or Uncle Colby, and I'd catch snippets of conversation. Things like as long as he doesn't find out, or it's working better than we planned. That must have been frightening for a child. It was more confusing than frightening at first. I didn't understand what they were planning or why it mattered if I knew about my adoption. Lots of kids are adopted, right? But as I got older, I started noticing the pattern.
What pattern?
Reed took a sip of tea before answering. Every time you and Grandpa were generous, every birthday check, every Christmas gift, every time you paid for something I needed, Mom would get this satisfied look, like she'd accomplished something. And she'd always make sure I called you personally to thank you, coaching me exactly what to say to make you feel good about helping. My heart ached at the thought of this little boy learning to manipulate the people who loved him. Did you understand what was happening? Not really when I was little. I just thought that's how families worked. But around 13 or 14, I started paying more attention to how Mom talked about money, how she timed her requests for help, how she'd bring me along when she wanted to ask you and Grandpa for something. She was using you as an emotional leverage. Exactly. She'd make me wear my school uniform when we visited, if she wanted to talk about tuition. She'd make sure I mentioned if I needed new clothes or sports equipment. She even coached me to look sad if she was planning to ask for money for an emergency. I set my teacup down harder than I intended. Anger flared in my chest. That's despicable. The worst part was, I really loved spending time with you and Grandpa. Those weren't fake feelings, even if the circumstances were staged. You both were the only adults in my life who seemed to care about what I thought and felt, not just what I could do for you. That broke something inside me. This boy had been starved for genuine affection while being used as a tool for financial manipulation. Reed, darling, I want you to know that our love for you was never dependent on you being biologically related to us. His eyes filled with the tears he'd been holding back all evening. I hoped that was true, but I wasn't sure. I've spent years wondering if you'd still care about me if you knew the truth. Well, now you know. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both processing the enormous weight of what had been revealed. Then Reed spoke again, his voice quieter. There's something else I have to tell you about tonight. Something that happened after I left the lawyer's office. What? I didn't go straight to you. First, I went back to Mom's house to grab some of my things. I thought maybe I could avoid the confrontation, just disappear for a while until things blew over. But they were already there, and they were planning something. My stomach clenched. What kind of planning? They were on a conference call with a lawyer Uncle Dean knows. They were discussing how to contest the will, but not just on the grounds of Grandpa's mental state. They want to contest my right to any inheritance as a fraudulent heir. What does that mean? Reed's hands trembled slightly as he set down his teacup. It means they're planning to throw me under the bus to save themselves. They want to argue that because I'm not really family, any gifts or money you and Grandpa gave me over the years were obtained under false pretenses. They believe if they can prove fraud, they can invalidate parts of the will. The cruelty of it took my breath away. They were willing to destroy a 17-year-old boy to get their hands on money. It gets worse, Grandma. They were also talking about having you declared incompetent. What? Uncle Dean said. Her poor judgment in continuing to support him after finding out the truth about his adoption could be evidence of diminished mental capacity. They think if they can prove you're not mentally capable of managing your estate, they can have themselves appointed as your guardians and control the money that way. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. My own children weren't just willing to steal from me. They were willing to destroy my autonomy, my dignity, my relationships. Everything that stood between them and Wade's money. Did they see you listening? No, I was in my room with the door ajar, but I heard enough to know they're meeting with the lawyer first thing tomorrow morning to start the process. Mom was talking about finding doctors who would testify about your mental state. Uncle Colby was researching guardianship laws, and Uncle Dean was already figuring out how the inheritance should be divided once they had control of it. And what about you? What happens to you in their plan? Reed's smile was bitter and far too mature for his age. I become the victim they're protecting you from. The scammer who took an old woman for her money. They plan to portray themselves as the loving children who discovered the fraud and stepped in to save their mother from further exploitation. The beauty of hitting rock bottom, I realized, is that you finally stop being afraid of the fall. My children had proven themselves to be fake, to every betrayal, every cruelty in service of their greed. There was nothing left they could take from me, save my dignity, and I'd be damned if I let them have that too. Reed, I said, my voice calmer than it had been all evening. How would you feel about helping me beat them at their own game? For the first time since he'd burst into the restaurant, Reed smiled a genuine smile, full of hope and determination. I'd feel like someone in this family was finally fighting back. Good, I said, reaching for Wade's address book. Because tomorrow, we're going to pay Mr. Thompson a visit ourselves, and then we're driving up to that lake house to see what other surprises Wade might have left us. What I didn't tell Reed was that I was already formulating a plan that would give my children exactly what they deserved. And it wouldn't require me to stoop to their level to do it. Wade had always been 3 steps ahead of everyone else. If I knew my husband, this inheritance was just the beginning of the protection he had built around me. It was time to find out what else he had planned. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Reed was still asleep on my sofa, curled up under Wade's old wool blanket, looking peaceful for the first time since I'd known him. I quietly made coffee, and called Mr. Thompson's office as soon as it opened. Miss Diana, his secretary said warmly. Mr. Thompson was hoping to hear from you. Can you come in this morning? He has some additional documents your husband left with specific instructions for release. Additional documents? Wade truly had thought of everything. Reed stirred as I got dressed, sitting up and rubbing his eyes like a confused child. For a moment, I could see the little boy he had been when Bianca first brought him around. Sweet, unsure, trying so hard to please everyone. How do you feel? I asked. Like I've slept for the first time in years, he said, and I knew exactly what he meant. We took a cab to Mr. Thompson's office, an unassuming downtown building that had been Wade's law firm for over 30 years. Thompson himself was probably my age, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the patient demeanor of a man who had spent decades helping families through their worst moments. Miss Diana, he said, rising as we entered his office. And you must be Reed. Reed looked surprised. He did. Oh yes, he was very concerned for your well-being. In fact, that's part of why we're here today. Mr. Thompson gestured for us to sit. Your husband left very specific instructions regarding additional materials to be shared if anyone tried to contest the will or questioned family relationships. He pulled out another yellow envelope, thicker than the one Reed had brought me last night. These documents were not part of the formal will reading because Wade hoped they wouldn't be necessary. But given what happened with your other children yesterday evening, I think it's time you saw them. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, bank statements, phone records, and what looked like transcripts of conversations. Wade hired a private investigator 10 months ago, Mr. Thompson explained. He had become suspicious of some of your children's financial requests and wanted to understand what was truly happening. The first photo showed Bianca emerging from a luxury spa that cost more per visit than most people spent on groceries in a month. The date stamp showed it was taken 3 days after she had tearfully called me, saying she couldn't afford Reed's school supplies. She told me she was working extra shifts as a nurse to make ends meet, I whispered. The next photo showed Dean in an expensive restaurant, clearly entertaining clients, bottles of champagne on the table. The attached receipt showed a bill for over $800. The same day, he had borrowed $4,000 from me for urgent medical expenses. But it was the bank statements that really told the story. Page after page showed deposits from me and Wade, followed by immediate transfers to luxury boutiques, vacation resorts, and high-end purchases. None of the money we'd given them for emergencies had actually been used for emergencies. There's more, Mr. Thompson said gently.
Audio recordings.
Wade recorded them, and with your knowledge. He insisted on putting family meetings on speakerphone, claiming his hearing was getting worse and he needed the volume. What they didn't know was that he was recording as well. He handed me a small digital device with headphones. This conversation took place 6 weeks before Wade's death. Your children had requested a family meeting to discuss your future care needs. I put on the headphones with trembling hands and pressed play. Bianca's voice came through clearly. Mom's getting more forgetful, Dad. We're worried now that she's living alone. She seems fine to me, Wade's voice replied, but I could hear the weariness in his tone. Well, she wouldn't seem confused to you, because you're with her all the time, Dean's voice interjected, but when we visit, she repeats herself a lot, forgets conversations we've had. I paused the recording, looking at Mr. Thompson, confused. I don't repeat myself. My memory is fine. Keep listening, he said sadly. Colby's voice. The thing is, Dad, if anything happens to you, we need to make sure Mom is protected. Maybe we should be more involved in her finances now, while you're still here to ease the transition. What kind of involvement? Wade asked. Again, Bianca. Just basic things. Maybe she could add one of us to her bank accounts. Give us power of attorney for emergencies. You know how overwhelming financial decisions can be for women her age. Women her age. I was 67 then, not senile. She's perfectly capable of handling her own affairs, Wade said firmly. Of course she is right now, Dean responded softly. But we're talking about being proactive, planning ahead. And honestly, Dad, some of the funds you two have been spending seem unnecessary. Such as? Well, all that money on Reed, for instance, Colby chimed in. I mean, we love the kid, but he's not even really family, and the amounts you're spending on him could be used for a really nice assisted living facility for Mom, when the time comes. My blood ran cold. Reed, sitting beside me, had gone completely still. Wade's voice was dangerous now. Reed is absolutely family, and what we spend on him is none of your business. Dad, be realistic, Bianca said. He's an adopted kid, almost 18, and he'll be out of our lives anyway soon enough. That money you're putting into his college fund could be used for a really nice assisted living arrangement for Mom, when the time comes. Your mother doesn't need an assisted living arrangement. Not yet, Dean agreed. But if we start planning now, putting the legal frameworks in place, it will be so much easier when the time does come. Perhaps you should consider updating your will too, just to make sure everything is set up to protect Mom from having to make difficult decisions on her own. The recording continued for another 20 minutes. My children systematically laid out their plan to undermine my autonomy and independence, all while convincing Wade it was for my own good. They painted a picture of me as a declining, helpless woman who needed their protection from my own poor judgment. Most chillingly, they sounded utterly reasonable, framing every suggestion as motivated by love and concern. When the recording ended, I sat in silence for a long time. Mr. Thompson handed me a tissue. There are 12 more recordings like this, he said. Each one showing a pattern of your children attempting to gain control of your finances while systematically undermining your competency in your husband's eyes. But Wade saw right through it. He was furious. That's when he hired the detective and began to put plans in motion to protect you. Mr. Thompson pulled out another document. This is a comprehensive financial analysis of every dollar you and Wade have given your children over the past 15 years. The number at the bottom of the page made me dizzy. $1,000,000. Almost $1 million, I breathed. Money that was meant for emergencies, doctor's bills, education, basic living expenses. The investigator tracked where it actually went. He flipped to another page. Luxury travel, designer clothing, expensive cars, home renovations, spa treatments, high-end electronics. Your children have been living a lifestyle far beyond their means, financed solely by your generosity. Reed spoke for the first time since we arrived. They were never struggling. Not even close. Exactly, Mr. Thompson confirmed. And they've been planning this inheritance heist for years. The investigator found email chains between your children dating back 5 years, discussing how to better manage Mom and Dad's money, and how to divide assets. He handed me one more document. This is the most important. It's a detailed plan Wade created for what would happen if your children tried to contest his will or questioned your mental competency. The document was titled Protection Protocol for Diana Reynolds, and it spanned 15 pages of the most thorough legal planning I had ever seen. Wade had anticipated every move my children might make and created countermeasures for each one. He built multiple layers of protection for you, Mr. Thompson explained, legal, financial, and even personal safeguards. But the most important thing is this. He pointed to a clause at the end. Any heir who contests the will or attempts to have Diana declared incompetent automatically forfeits any claim to the inheritance, and their share goes directly to Diana. So, if they try to fight this, they lose everything. Wade made sure. He also set up a trust that becomes active if anyone tries to challenge your mental competency. It immediately transfers all assets to the control of an independent trustee until the challenges are resolved. I looked at Reed, who was reading over my shoulder, his eyes wide with astonishment. Your grandfather truly thought of everything. But there's one more thing. He left you a letter that was only to be opened after you'd seen all this evidence. He handed me a sealed envelope, addressed in Wade's handwriting, for my beloved Diana, when you're ready to fight back. As I tore open the envelope, I realized Wade hadn't just left me an inheritance. He had left me the tools to reclaim my life and protect the people who truly mattered, like the young man sitting beside me who had risked everything to tell me the truth. My children thought they were 3 steps ahead, but Wade had been playing an entirely different game, and now it was my turn to make the next move. The drive to the lake house took 2 hours. Reed and I were mostly silent as we wound through the familiar roads Wade and I had traveled together for 3 decades. Every curve brought back memories. The first time we'd seen the property, the summers we'd spent renovating it ourselves, the quiet evenings on the porch watching the sunset over the lake. I had read Wade's letter twice before we left Mr. Thompson's office, and I was still processing his words. The man I had lived with for 45 years knew things about our children that I had been too trusting to see. But more than that, he had loved me enough to spend his final months building a fortress around me.
Are you nervous?
Reed asked as we pulled into the long gravel driveway. I don't think nervous is the right word, I said, looking at the house rising before us.
I think I'm ready.
The house looked exactly as we had left it the weekend before Wade's diagnosis. The same blue shutters, the same wraparound porch, the same window boxes that would soon need planting. But knowing that it was truly mine now, that Wade had insured it, changed everything about how it felt. Reed helped me with the key Mr. Thompson had given us. Not the old key we always used, but a new one Wade had apparently made. Inside, the house smelled of the lavender sachets I'd left in all the drawers, mixed with the faint scent of the wood polish Wade always insisted on. It's beautiful, Grandma, Reed said, looking around the main room with its stone fireplace and walls lined with books.
I can see why Mom wanted to renovate it.
Your mother wanted to gut it, I corrected. She always said it was too old-fashioned, too small, too quiet. She wanted to turn it into some kind of trophy home. I walked slowly through the room, remembering the kitchen where Wade and I had cooked breakfast together every morning. The reading nook where we'd spent rainy afternoons, the bedroom where we'd planned our retirement dreams. But it was in Wade's study that I found what he'd left for me. The room looked normal at first glance. His desk still covered with the crossword puzzles he never finished. His reading glasses still folded on a half-read biography. But there was an envelope on his desk that hadn't been there before. My name in his meticulous handwriting. This is it, I whispered, my hands trembling as I picked it up. Reed stood quietly in the doorway as I sat in Wade's chair and opened the envelope. Inside were 3 sheets of his cream-colored stationery, covered in the script I knew as well as my own. My dearest Diana, it began, and I had to pause for a moment to compose myself. If you are reading this, it means our children have shown you who they truly are, and you have finally seen what I have seen for years. I am sorry, my love. I am sorry you had to discover their true nature this way. And I am sorry I couldn't protect you from this pain while I was still with you. But I want you to know that every decision I made regarding our estate, every precaution I took, every document I had prepared, was all done out of love for you, not out of anger towards them, though God knows I was angry. Love for you, and a determination that you would never be at their mercy. I know you think you failed as a mother. You've told me so many times over the years, especially after particularly difficult encounters with Bianca, Dean, or Colby. You've blamed yourself for their selfishness, their entitlement, their coldness towards you. But Diana, darling, you didn't fail. They did. You gave them everything a parent should give. Love, support, guidance, opportunities. You sacrificed your own dreams to help them achieve theirs. You worked extra shifts to pay for their education, went without things you wanted so they could have what they needed. And not once did you make them feel guilty for the burden. The problem was never your love. The problem was that they learned to see your love as a weakness, your generosity as something they were entitled to, your forgiveness as permission to hurt you again. I saw it happening gradually over the years. Each time you bailed them out of financial trouble they created themselves, each time you forgave them for missing important events in your life. Each time you excused their behavior to others, they learned there were no consequences for treating you poorly. So they pushed it further and further. I should have intervened sooner. I should have insisted we stop enabling them years ago. But I knew how much you loved them, and I couldn't bear to be the one to make you choose between your husband and your children. So I stayed silent, and watched them break your heart again and again. But when they started talking about managing your finances and questioning your mental competency, I could no longer stay silent. The things they said about you when they thought I wasn't listening, the way they spoke about you as if you were already gone, as if you were an obstacle to their inheritance rather than their mother, that made me realize they were capable of anything. So I made my plans not to punish them, though they deserve punishment. I made my plans to protect you. Every dollar I've left you is yours to do with as you wish. Every legal protection I've put in place is to safeguard your independence. Every piece of evidence I've collected is to defend you should they try to portray you as incompetent. But more than that, Diana, I wanted to make sure you understood something. You are not responsible for their choices. You are not obligated to sacrifice your peace for their greed. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. The woman I married 45 years ago was strong, independent, and capable of anything she set her mind to. The only thing that changed over the years was that you let others convince you otherwise. But that woman is still there, my love. She's been waiting for permission to stand up for herself. Consider this letter your permission. Reed is a good boy, Diana. I know he isn't our biological grandson, but he has shown more loyalty and love to our family than our own children ever have. If you wish to keep him in your life, you have my full support. If he chooses to stay with you rather than with them, I think you will both be better for it. I have left some additional funds in a separate account for his education. Not because he is entitled to it by birth, but because he has earned it, by being the kind of person our actual grandchildren never learned to be. The account information is in the safe behind my diploma.
The combination is your birthday.
There is also something else in the safe I wish to give you. It is a deed to the property next door to this house. I bought it years ago, thinking we might want to build a guest house one day. I never told you because it was meant to be a surprise for our 50th anniversary. We won't make it to 50 years together, but I want you to have it anyway.
Build something beautiful, Tere.
Build something that is entirely yours. The children will try to come back into your life once they realize they cannot break the will. They will apologize, make promises, swear they have changed. They will use every emotional lever they think will work. Guilt over destroying the family. Concern for your health. Claims that they only wanted to protect you. Do not believe them. People capable of the degree of manipulation and betrayal they have shown you do not change just because their plans fail. They will come back for the same reason they always came, because they want something from you. But you owe them nothing more, my love. You have already given them more than any parent should.
The rest of your life is yours to live as you choose.
I hope you choose to be happy. I hope you choose to travel all the places we talked about visiting. I hope you choose to spoil yourself, as you have spoiled everyone else your entire life. I hope you choose to surround yourself only with people who love you for who you are, not for what you can give them. And I hope you know, every single day, how much you were loved. Not just by me, though I loved you more than words could ever express, but by everyone whose life you touched with your kindness, your generosity, your huge heart.
You are enough, Diana.
You were always enough, and you deserve all the good life has to offer.
All my love, always and forever, Wade.
P.S. The wine cellar has been restocked with the Bordeaux you love. I may be gone, but I'm still looking out for you. As I finished reading, tears streamed down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of recognition, of feeling truly seen and loved for the first time in years. Reed had quietly entered the room and was sitting in the chair across the desk, his own eyes damp with tears. He really loved you, he said softly. He really did. I folded the letter carefully, holding it to my chest, and he was right about everything. I looked around Wade's study, the safe behind his diploma, the windows looking out over the property that was now truly mine. For the first time since his death, I felt Wade's presence not as a loss, but as a gift. He was still protecting me, still guiding me, still loving me. And he had given me everything I needed to finally stand up for myself. Come on, I said to Reed, standing up with more energy than I'd felt in months. Let's see what else your grandfather left us. But first, I had some phone calls to make. 3 phone calls to be exact, to 3 people who were about to learn that their mother wasn't the weak, manipulative woman they thought she was. It was time to show them exactly who they had been dealing with all these years. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of the lake house, watching Reed graduate from the local high school. He had transferred for his senior year, claiming he wanted a fresh start. But I knew the real reason. He wanted to be with me, and I wanted him to stay too. The guest house Wade had dreamed of was almost finished, rising from the property next to the main house like something out of a fairy tale. Reed had designed it himself. He'd always been artistically gifted, though his mother had never encouraged that side of him. It would be his space when he went off to college in the fall, but also his home base whenever he wanted to come back, because this was home for both of us now. The phone calls I had made that day in Wade's study had been short and final. 3 conversations that ended 40 years of being taken for granted, of manipulation, and of being treated like an ATM instead of a mother. Bianca had cried, of course. Tears had always been her favorite weapon. "Mom, you can't be serious. We're family. Families forgive each other." "You're right," I had told her. "Families forgive each other, but they also treat each other with respect. And you stopped doing that years ago." "But what about Reed?"
"You can't just steal my son."
"I'm not stealing anyone. Reed is 17 years old enough to choose where he wants to live. And he's chosen to stay with the person who actually loves him." Dean had tried anger instead. "This is ridiculous, Mom. You're letting that boy poison you against your own children. Don't you see what he's doing?" "What I see," I had replied, "is a young man who showed me more honesty and loyalty in one day than you have shown me in years. What I see is someone who found me when I was alone and heartbroken, instead of plotting with lawyers how to steal my inheritance." "We weren't plotting. We were trying to protect you." "From what, Dean? From having enough money to care for myself? From making my own decisions? From being happy? No, you were trying to protect yourselves from the possibility that I might spend my own money instead of hoarding it for you." Colby had been the most honest, probably because he'd always been the worst liar. "Look, Mom, maybe we mishandled things, but we're still your kids. You can't just cut us off." "I can," I had said, "and I am. You made your choice when you decided to lie to me, to steal from me, and to plot to have me declared incompetent. Now you have to live with the consequences of that choice." In the months that followed, they had tried everything. Flowers, cards, unannounced visits to the house. Bianca had even brought Phoenix once, assuming the sight of my granddaughter would weaken my resolve. But I had learned something important from Wade's letter. I was not responsible for fixing relationships that other people had broken. Reed blossomed in a way I had never seen before. Without the constant pressure to be the perfect manipulative tool, he had grown into the remarkable young man he had always been inside. He was witty, thoughtful, creative, and surprisingly for his age, an excellent cook. He had been accepted into an art college with a partial scholarship, and Wade's education fund would cover the rest. But more than that, he had become the family I had always wished for. Someone who asked about my day because they cared about the answer. Someone who remembered things that were important to me. Someone who hugged me just because, not because he wanted something. The guest house was his graduation gift, but also my gift to myself. For the first time in my life, I was building something from the ground up that was mine, something that would exist exactly as I wanted it to. Grandma Diana. Reed called from the yard, where he was adjusting the new porch furniture we'd picked out together. "Ms. Miller is here." Ms. Miller was our next-door neighbor, a widow my age who had become a dear friend over the past few months. She was the first person I had told about Wade's letter, and she had cried with me. "Diana," she said, climbing the porch steps with a wrapped gift in her hands. "I brought Reed a graduation present." "You shouldn't have, Margaret." "Of course I should have. He's family." Family. The word held a different meaning now than it had a year ago. Family wasn't just people who shared your blood. It was people who showed up for you, who chose to love you, who treated you with respect and kindness. Reed opened Margaret's gift, art supplies, expensive ones he'd admired at the art store in town but never would have asked for. His face lit up in a way that reminded me why I had fallen in love with this boy who wasn't my grandson, but felt more like my grandson than any blood relative ever had. "This is too much," he said, but Margaret waved him off. "Nonsense. You'll be a famous artist one day, and I want to be able to say I knew you when." We spent the evening on the porch, the three of us watching the sunset paint the lake in gold and rose hues. Reed sketched, while Margaret and I talked about our gardens, our books, our quiet, peaceful lives. Just as the sun dipped below the trees, a car pulled into the driveway. My stomach automatically tightened. 6 months of peace had made me wary of unexpected visitors. But it was just Dr. Ellis from town, making his weekly check-in on Margaret's blood pressure medication. He had become another unexpected addition to our small, self-selected family, often staying for dinner after his house calls, bringing stories from his practice and a dry wit that reminded me of Wade. "How's our graduate?" he asked Reed, settling into the fourth porch chair we'd added just for him. "Officially done with high school as of this morning," Reed grinned. "And officially panicking about college." "Good," Dr. Ellis said. "Being a little scared means you're paying attention." As the evening progressed, our small group grew. Tom from the hardware store stopped by to drop off the mailbox Reed had ordered for the guest house, custom-made with his initials and a small painted design. Lena from the bookstore brought a bottle of wine to celebrate Reed's graduation and ended up staying for dinner. This was my life now, not the grand social circle my children had always wanted for me, but something better. A community of people who truly cared for each other, who came not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Around 10 p.m., as our impromptu party wound down, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. After months of ignoring calls from my children, it had become habit. But the number was unfamiliar, so I picked up. "Miss Diana, this is Noelle Thompson, James Thompson's daughter. I'm sorry to call so late, but I wanted to let you know we completed the final part of your husband's instructions today." Mr. Thompson had passed away 2 months ago, and his daughter had taken over his practice. She had been handling the last details of Wade's estate planning. "What instructions?" "The charitable donations. Your husband set up a fund that was to be distributed to local charities 6 months after the will was settled, provided there were no successful challenges to its terms. Since your children's legal challenges were dismissed, we were able to distribute the funds today." "How much?" $250,000, Miss Diana, split between the Children's Hospital, the Women's Shelter, and the local library literacy program. Your husband left specific instructions that the donations be made in your name. "In my name?" Even in death, Wade was making sure people knew I was a woman of substance. A woman who gave back to her community. A woman who deserved respect. After I hung up, I sat for a moment in silence, watching Reed help Margaret down the porch steps to Dr. Ellis's car. Lena packed up leftover cake to take home to her teenage daughter. Tom was telling an elaborate story that had everyone laughing. This was Wade's final gift to me. Not just the money or the house or the legal protections, but the permission to build a life that made me happy. The permission to stop trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it, and to accept love from people who offered it freely. Reed came back onto the porch and sat in the chair next to mine. "Good day?" he asked. "The best," I said and meant it. "Oh, Grandma Diana," he said softly. "I know I'm not really your grandson. I know the DNA test proved that, but you're the most real family I've ever had." I reached over and took his hand. This young man, who had risked everything to tell me the truth, who had chosen me when making that choice cost him everything he had known. "Reed," I said, "blood doesn't make family. Love makes family, choice makes family, showing up makes family. And you have been more family to me than anyone else in my life." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars reflect on the lake, listening to the peaceful sounds of the night. Tomorrow, Reed would start packing for college. In the fall, I would drive him to university and help him move into his dorm, just like any proud grandmother would. And when he came home for the holidays, it would be to this house, to this life we had built together, to this family we had chosen. My children would probably always try to come back into my life. They would probably show up for the holidays, claim they had changed, try to guilt me into forgiving them. But I had Wade's letter in my dresser drawer, and I would read it whenever I needed to be reminded of who I was and what I deserved. I deserved peace. I deserved respect. I deserved to be loved for who I was, not for what I could provide. And here, sitting on this porch, surrounded by people who saw me clearly and loved me anyway, I finally had all three. The lake was perfectly still, mirroring the stars like a looking glass. Everything was exactly as it should be. Everything was exactly as Wade had planned. And for the first time in years, I was exactly who I was meant to be. Well, I'm curious about you who have heard my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes?
Have you ever gone through something similar? Comment below.
And in the meantime, I'm showing you 2 more stories on the screen that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thanks for watching until now. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, please consider supporting our channel with a small donation. Your generosity helps us continue to share inspiring stories like these. Thank you.